I was born 17 years ago. For the past 6 months, I've been in my basement playing Skyrim. But for all those hours, I've never understood what the hell has been going on. I scoured the internet, searching for wikis, to find even the most obscure events in the Elder Scrolls. Behold, sunlight now enters my room. These are the early hours of the morning, and my few moments of free time. Fueled by obscene amounts of caffeine, I search for the events of the Elder Scrolls lore.
The Forsworn, also known as the Reachmen, Madmen of the Reach, and the Witches of High Rock, or Witchmen of High Rock, that one can vary a bit, are a tribal group of racially mixed, but primarily Bretons, who inhabit the Reach in southwestern Skyrim. They mainly use primitive gear and hedge magic, and have a tribal appearance in nature. Most of the citizens of the Reach, and of the whole Empire in general for that matter, consider them to be 2 septums short of a pint of ale, which is to say, crazy! And based on what your average citizen hears about these guys, that isn't very surprising. Perhaps the most infamous event involving the Forsworn is the appropriately named Markarth incident. The Markarth incident was a battle that took place after the Great War and before the Civil War in Skyrim. So, this happened in 4th Era 174. So, during the massive war, the Great War, in between the Empire and the Eldmeri Dominion, legionaries were in very short supply. So they all had to be called out of the Reach in to fight in other areas in the Empire, primarily Hammerfell and Cyrodiil. This left a group of disgruntled natives called the Reachmen, who had long considered the Reach their own personal territory, and the Nords just as occupiers. Seeing their chance, they seized it. The Jarl of Reach could not quell the uprising and was killed in the struggle, and the rebellion was successful. The Reachmen ruled over Markarth and the entire Reach as an independent kingdom in Skyrim from 4th Era 174 to 4th Era 176. During this time, the kingdom was relatively peaceful, and the Reachmen ruled the land really not that unfairly. Granted, there was a fair amount of blood in the original outburst of the rebellion, but once they actually got in charge, things were not too overtly bloody. A few nobles and some of the richest and most brutal landowners were killed, but other than that, your average population was not too hindered. During these years, they were making overtures to the Empire to be recognized as a legitimate kingdom. However, when the Great War ended in 4th Era 176, with the Empire signing the White Gold Concordat, Igmund, the son of the Jarl that had been killed, took it upon himself to regain his kingdom. However, he was not powerful enough to do it on his own. So, with the help of a certain Ulfric Stormcloak, who had already attracted a collection of followers at this point, they came over to the Reach to help the Jarl expel the Reachmen. However, there was a catch. Ulfric was a very traditional Nord, and wanted to be free to worship Talos, the god whose worship had recently been banned by the signing of the White Gold Concordat. However, the Jarl Igmund didn't have that Jarl Igmund, not the Jarl Igmund. Well, you know what, that made sense, but anyways, screw grammar, back with the story. Agreed to this, and Ulfric and his gang of Nord warriors ended up retaking the city. Reports vary, but everyone's on the same page that this fight was extremely bloody. It's said that every official who worked for the Reachmen was killed, even if they had surrendered, that native women were tortured, and that anyone who did not fight with Ulfric and his gang of followers were killed. However, some of this might just be Imperial propaganda, but it's pretty easy to tell that this was an extremely bloody fight, even for Skyrim standards. When all was said and done after the fight, we have Markarth back securely in the hands of the newly appointed Jarl Igmund, and Ulfric Stormcloak, who is actually free to stay there and worship for at least a while. However, once the Imperial officials and the Thalmor ambassadors finally catch wind of this, they end up having to be expelled. Otherwise, the Empire would have faced another war with the Eldmeri Dominion. This was day one for the Stormcloak Rebellion. However, that's a whole other story. Madanak and the other leaders of the Forsworn were captured, and while a great many were executed, some of the more important ones, including Madanak, were actually spared, and were sent down into the Silverblood-owned Sidna mine to work. Now, this is because they were considered to be more alive than dead, not a great clemency on behalf of the Nords. It's rumored that they're still down there to this day, and that Madanak is even still somehow getting instructions out to the Forsworn to help them keep fighting. You may have noticed that I have been calling them the Reachmen up until this point, and that my tongue slipped back there and I called them the Forsworn. Well, of course, after Markarth is back in the hands of the Nords, they retreat out into the countryside, where they call themselves the Forsworn, and have been waging a constant guerrilla war on basically anyone who isn't a Forsworn ever since. So the Reach is easily the most dangerous place in Skyrim. And it's not just the Forsworn, there's like a crazy cannibal cult over there, and a bunch of other creepy shit to haunt my nightmares. But anyways, yeah, you get the idea. Forsworn attacking caravans, random travelers, even guards from time to time. It is a crazy place. And that's twice in this thing that I've said crazy. So, one thing I can't really begin repeating enough is that sources against the Forsworn, at least in written form, are kind of biased, but we do have a few that try to give a more balanced view. Also, in some cases, we've actually been able to talk to the Forsworn, hint hint, it's in the game, and find out that they're not as bad as all that. So, we're kind of at two sides of a cliff right now, if that analogy makes any sense at all, which I think it doesn't, but... oh yeah, we're at a fork in a road. There, that makes a lot more sense. So, if Madanak were to be killed, that would pretty much knock the Forsworn out of the fight. Of course, when you kill the leader, they can't really run a very effective guerrilla resistance anymore. But if Madanak and some of the other key Forsworn leaders were to break out of Sidna Mine, then they might actually be able to recapture their kingdom back. Things seem to be heating up in Markarth, with a string of murders, and rumors that there are Forsworn agents living on the streets. We also have the Forsworn established fairly well in the various lore. They, of course, worship the old gods, not the 9 divines, and yes, 9, Talos is real, divines, as we know them. In fact, if you help them, you even get the armor of the old gods, which is a pretty cool-looking piece of armor. So, that will do it for today's episode. Heart of Thorn, Bones of Wild. In life forsworn, rise from death, blood of our blood. That is the hexamajugal said by the the Hargravens during the Briarheart ceremony, and as I may have previously mentioned, Briarhearts are sort of like Forsworn mages. But anyways, that's going to do it for today. I'm TheLoopyAlchemist. Thank you so much for watching. Well, as usual, if there's any topic you'd like me to do, or if you have any questions, comments, ideas, any of that stuff, please do not hesitate to ask. Well, I'll see you next time. Also, Dragonborn, the DLC, looks amazing. Later.